Hey everyone, going to get started now. Thank you very much for coming. For those who don't know me, my name is AJ Warner. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Offchain Labs, the initial developers and core contributors to the Arbitrum protocol. I also sit on the oversight committee of the Arbitrum DAO's operating entity. And I'm excited to speak to you today about Arbitrum's approach to layer twos. A lot of my colleagues have spoken. I'm sure you've been familiar with Arbitrum and you've heard about the technology stack and what it does. The goal of this talk is really probably to formulate more the business strategy and the vision for all of the different pieces in Arbitrum. We obviously have Arbitrum 1, which is the DAO-governed Arbitrum chain, Arbitrum Orbit, which is the ability to launch your own chain, like Robinhood announced yesterday. They are going to be using the Arbitrum stack. So many people often don't understand all the different components. How do these pieces fit together, and what's the broader strategy from both a product and business perspective? In order to fully understand this, it's really important to understand the economic differences between how an L1 operates, a layer 1 blockchain, and how an L2 blockchain like the Arbitrum stack operates. Some of the limitations from a business perspective of L1 blockchains are, other than Bitcoin, for example, which is proof of work, they typically take their transaction fees and they pass them through to stakers or validators in the form of rewards as payment for economic security. Generally, the issue with that is the blockchain as a business has no retained earnings. Everything passes through to the L1. And the cost of that can be quite high. Typically, L1s often are frequently subsidizing this to the tune of up to around 7% in order to ensure that validators are sufficiently compensated to pay for to secure the blockchain. Arbitrum and layer 2 technologies in general do not have that limitation. All Arbitrum transactions are secured by the protocol on the layer 1 Ethereum, and they don't have to pay for their own sets of validators for security. So what's critical about that is when you have Arbitrum transactions, about 93 to 94% of the transaction fee is actually retained by the protocol. About 6% is paid to Ethereum in the form of blobs or data availability. But the key thing here is you don't have to have any token issuance for security. The protocol retains earnings, and you can compound and grow the treasury of the Arbitrum DAO. And sometimes this is very misunderstood. People don't understand this dichotomy of when you don't earn yield by holding an Arbitrum token, that you don't actually capture economic value. In reality, and this is where Arbitrum is actually quite different from other L2 ecosystems, every on-chain transaction, the transaction fees flow directly into the on-chain treasury controlled by Arbitrum token holders, or at least 94% of them. So what that does, though, is it enables us, and this is the unique structure of the Arbitrum DAO, it enables us to actually reinvest into the ecosystem or to do whatever the protocol and the token holders would like to do with these fees. But this structural difference between L1 and L2 economics is critical to understanding the vision for the Arbitrum protocol. And Arbitrum is a digital sovereign nation. And we'll talk about what that means. Every blockchain, whether it's an L1 or an L2, prioritizes the first two of these buckets. Constituents and stakeholders. That's developers, users, token holders, investors, all of those different participants, how are they benefiting and reaping rewards from the protocol? The natural resources in this analogy. Arbitrum's natural resources are selling block space. We have Arbitrum 1, a very liquid, secure, credibly neutral, decentralized L2, has the most ETH stablecoin liquidity of any L2 in existence, and we also have the Orbit stack. The way we think about Arbitrum is that as a platform. And when we think about the strategy around the Orbit chain, it's the same thing. That's our natural resources. That is what's valuable. And we'll talk about that more in a second. What most blockchain ecosystems are not focusing on is the third, the economic zones of opportunity. And the reason for that is because of how the economics of these ecosystems are structured. When you don't have the ability to retain earnings, you're actually not able to do this because there's no concept of reinvestment of the DAO's assets. So we'll talk about these in a little bit more detail so that you can get a better sense. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. There's other talks going on at the conference about this, but just so you understand what I would say is the core unique differentiating factors of Arbitrum. So Arbitrum 1, which is, again, like I said, the main Arbitrum protocol, has about $15 billion in TVL, very large ecosystem hub. is the first resource, so to speak, and then the Arbitrum Orbit protocol. So Orbit, like many L2s, is the stack for which you can deploy an Arbitrum chain. What makes Orbit unique is that its prioritization is on being flexible to the needs of the developers. And you can do whatever you want with it. We have in our SDK the ability to choose whether you want custom gas tokens, whether you want alternative DA, whether you want to have a permissioned or permissionless, you want to add privacy layers, KYC. You can really do whatever you want to the stack. And the thesis that we have is that the world doesn't need more blockchains. What we need is blockchains to become part of the product for people who want to launch their own chains. So for example, yesterday when Robinhood announced that they want to build their own chain, that chain might look different than Arbitrum One, and that's great. And we want to make sure that we can enable Robinhood and everybody else to design the chains as they like. And the way the DAO earns from this is if they launch an L2 blockchain, it's very simple. It's a 10% profit share through what we call the Arbitrum expansion program with the Arbitrum DAO. Every dollar gets funneled directly into the DAO's on-chain treasury. Stylus is a technical example of something that differentiates Arbitrum. Arbitrum is an EVM-compatible blockchain, like many other L2 rollups. But what makes Arbitrum unique is you can write in Rust as well. You do not have to write in Solidity or other EVM-compatible languages. We've seen teams take advantage of this with on-chain dark pools and other more advanced cryptography, and this is one of the key features that makes Arbitrum unique. And finally is Time Boost. This is a new thing that was deployed to Arbitrum One about 2 months ago. Time Boost is a priority auction mechanism that basically provides market makers or other sophisticated actors who want to have faster latency to the sequencer an ability for the protocol to internalize those profits in the form of an auction. It's been live about 2 months, and it's annualizing around $15 million in gross profit for the Arbitrum DAO on a yearly basis today. So just to talk a little bit about organic demand that we're seeing, again, in the Orbit stack, we're seeing more than 100 chains launched on the Arbitrum, and it's a very, very varied set of participants. So obviously, we know we're going to, surprise, surprise, Robinhood announced yesterday that they're launching an Arbitrum Orbit chain, which is obviously extremely exciting. But we have teams like Azuki and ApeChain are building in the consumer culture space. Proof of Play, Zai are building gaming chains. Plume, Kinto are building chains that are focused on RWAs. The stack is intended to be very flexible. And the reason for that is, and what we take pride of the Arbitrum as a platform, is it's a top 5 blockchain by economic activity in Arbitrum One, a top 5 stack by adoption, and it's providing opinionated block space. We want Arbitrum to be able to work with the developers throughout the journey and life cycle of the project. So if you're early stage and you don't want to launch your own chain, it's quite an ambitious thing to do, launch an Arbitrum One. And as you grow and as you scale, however you want to take your project, we want you to be able to use Arbitrum. And being able to capture the developer throughout that process is critical to the broader strategy. And that's the case with Robinhood. So Robinhood yesterday announced that they're bringing stocks to the EU, tokenized stocks on-chain. An extremely exciting announcement for the Arbitrum ecosystem. They're starting on Arbitrum One. So as of today on the Robinhood EU app, you can actually buy tokenized stocks, and it's on Arbitrum One. As they scale their crypto business, they plan on launching their own chain. And Arbitrum, again, provides the ability to have that flexibility for them to be throughout the journey of what they're trying to accomplish. And if you look at our mandate generally, it's quite broad. RWAs, we were working closely with BlackRock, Franklin Templeton. Stablecoins, USDT0, which is the interoperability protocol for Tether, has chosen Arbitrum as its hub chain. And for Paxos, Arbitrum is the only L2 that it supports today. In the gaming and consumer, we have crypto native teams like Azuki and ApeChain, for which we're building their blockchains for them. And then Lotte, a Korean conglomerate, Ubisoft, are building as well. And finally, most famously, Arbitrum is frequently known as the DeFi hub. And we have protocols like GMX and Pendle, which are Arbitrum sort of stalwarts for many years, Ostium, an early purpose protocol, as well as Hyperliquid, which sources all of their liquidity on-chain from Arbitrum One. It's about almost $4 billion today. So all of this demand actually generates opportunity for the Arbitrum DAO to take and compound what it's been generating. Again, its core 3 revenue streams are transaction fees on Arbitrum One, time boost fees on Arbitrum 1 and the 10% Arbitrum expansion program that it shares from all of the Orbit chains that are choosing to launch L2s. And all of this revenue creates opportunity and what we call economic zones of opportunity for the Arbitrum DAO to take advantage of. And I want to walk through this strategy. So we want to capture fees and be able to support builders and developers beyond the traditional relationship that you might see between blockchains and developers and users. And I'll give you some examples. So like I said before, sequencer and time boost fees, Arbitrum expansion program, those are sort of how you can think about the traditional revenue lines of what Arbitrum's trying to accomplish. But we have this flywheel and a dual mandate today for where Arbitrum is in its growth strategy of how do we both compound demand for the technology and also compound the DAO's treasury and assets. And that's really what we're focusing on today. How do we turn the assets of the Arbitrum DAO? For some context for folks that might not be familiar, the Arbitrum DAO has about 25,000 ETH and somewhere between $40 and $50 million in stable assets, again, that the DAO owns and controls outside of its ARB allocation. So I'm going to walk you through how you can think of some initiatives that the Arbitrum DAO has done. And this is sort of the blueprint of how we want to continue to build out the vision for that relationship in Arbitrum and that dual mandate of growing demand for the use of the technology and growing demand and growing the assets of the DAO. The Arbitrum Gaming Ventures, this is, I would like to say, one of the most misunderstood programs that the Arbitrum DAO has done. For those that might be familiar, it used to be called the Gaming Catalyst Program. And the thesis behind this initiative was gaming as a category has the ability to onboard a lot of users into blockchain. And gaming as a category is a very logical use case for blockchains, whether it's the sale of skins or marketplaces or other ways for people to interact with the games, it's very logical. The problem, though, with the gaming category is nobody wants to pay transaction fees. So you can have all of these users and all of these people running games on the chain, but if they don't pay transaction fees, you don't actually earn. They also don't typically use other things. The idea of like a gamer then opening like a leverage long position on GMX is like a pipe dream. Like that's just not the user sort of journey on blockchains. They play the game, they have fun, they might discover other games, and they might return to their business. So how do you support the category in a way that's actually sustainable? So what we did was we took about 6% of the Arbitrum DAO's ARB allocation and put it into a fund. The structure is a little bit more complex out of the Cayman Islands, but the way to think about it is the Arbitrum DAO is essentially almost like the LP of this fund. And the goal of it was, again, to manage this dual mandate. How do we help this vertical grow? And how do we ensure that the way we do it is sustainable and aligns from a business perspective with the teams deploying? So this entity, the Arbitrum Gaming Ventures, they've started and they deployed their first 5 investments into games like Wildcard, which is the Words with Friends founders, T-Rex Blockchain, Proof of Play, and others. And they've been leading rounds with really strong investors like Bitcraft and Paradigm and Framework. And again, the goal here is to be very particular, but have this dual strategy of growing the demand and also growing the DAO's treasury. And it's been a fantastic program and been really exciting to see. And what's interesting here is it ties very well into the orbit strategy. Because the more teams that we can have deploying orbits and expanding those zones of opportunity by bringing on more games into their own ecosystems, it expands the leverage for what the Arbitrum DAO's gaming venture fund is actually able to deploy capital into. This is another example. I think this has been a really effective program. When we first heard that BlackRock in 2024 was going to be launching money market funds, we realized quickly that this is going to be the beginning of a huge rush on-chain for traditional asset managers. And the thing that these institutions care about is assets under management. And how can we have them onboard into Arbitrum, critical for our strategy of having DeFi meet TradFi, and do it in a way that is sustainable for the ecosystem and also can generate for the DAO. So the DAO actually established something called the Stable Treasury Endowment Program, where it said, we're going to buy money market funds from asset managers that deploy to Arbitrum. And they took about $40 million in capital. They got RFPs from BlackRock, Franklin Templeton, Wisdom Tree, many other large global institutional players. And the thesis was, we want them on Arbitrum. We're going to have great compounding effects if they join the ecosystem, and we're also going to earn. So the DAOs earned in the first 8 months over $1 million in interest fees, yield basically from these money market funds. Again, diversify the treasury, holding stable assets, and compounding on that mission. And those are two examples. We've started a third program where we're doing DeFi management, where the DAO took 7,500 ETH, and they've deployed it back into the Arbitrum protocol to ensure that we have more liquidity, attracting more builders. And this is the thesis, this dual mandate. So how do we think about this in summary? I only have 5 minutes left, and hopefully we'll have time for 1 or 2 questions, is we've got a barbell product. Arbitrum One and Arbitrum Orbit. And across these two things, we believe we can serve any developer that wants to use the Arbitrum stack. And then we think on top of that, that we've got the Arbitrum technology platform and the DAO creating a flywheel where we can take the treasury assets, because the DAO retains its earnings, compound growth and demand for the protocol, and continue that flywheel so that we can meet our ambitious visions of having Arbitrum everywhere. And this is a multidimensional concept. We want Arbitrum to power chains. We want teams that want to build on Arbitrum One to be building on Arbitrum One. We want DeFi. We want gaming. We want TradFi. We want payments. And we want to be able to do it in a way that's sustainable for the Arbitrum ecosystem. So thank you very much, and I hope you want to join us on this journey to have Arbitrum everywhere. I think I have 3 minutes for questions left or so. So if anybody has one, I'm happy to answer.
Very controversial question maybe. Is Arbitrum exploring based rollup design?
We've looked at it. I'm not the best to analyze it from a technical perspective. I think from my understanding, there are certain benefits, there are certain drawbacks. Our current design works for what we're trying to accomplish largely, but again, I'm not the best to answer the technical pros and cons of that question.
Other question?
Does everything in the Arbitrum orbit follow the same priority auction rules?
No. So time boost is an added feature. So the way it works is by default, all chains launch with a first come first serve protocol, which is how Arbitrum One operated until about 2 months ago. If those protocols prefer, they can use any priority mechanism. So we like time boost a lot, and I'm happy to talk to you about why we think time boost is the best between trade-offs between latency and revenue capture. But they can use priority gas auctions if they'd like. They could use first come first serve. They can use time boost. We really like to have that flexibility. Like for example, if you're a gaming chain and you want just really fast block times and you don't really have any economic activity, you should not turn on time boost. And that sort of tracks our vision of we want the Orbit stack to become part of your product and become opinionated to make sure that your product can best serve your users.
Thank you.
How do you think about incentivizing killer applications that are built on top of Arbitrum to stay within the Arbitrum ecosystem? And I'm specifically thinking about the example of Hyperliquid, which was an absolutely breakout application the last 6 months, but now they're building their own chain.
Yeah, so it's a great question. So the Hyperliquid chain was always something that was part of their roadmap. The Hyperliquid core, which is like the purpose protocol, they source that liquidity from Arbitrum. And their team has told me this in the past, but obviously they'd be best to answer sort of their strategic questions around that. But from their perspective, Arbitrum One is secure, credibly neutral, decentralized, cheap, and liquid. And that was the best way and continues to be the best way for them to onboard people into the core purpose protocol. And in terms of incentivizing them, it's a great question. You know, you can perpetually incentivize, no pun intended, teams to do things, but I think the technology, the ecosystem has to be at some point the value proposition. Otherwise, it's constantly going to be a losing battle.
Okay, thanks for questions. Thanks for the talk.
Thank you very much.